heavily on the floor and burst into tears. I stood looking down at him, triumphantly.
The autobiography was written at a time when Myra Hindley was denying all involvement in the Moors murders. This made it difficult for her to address her relationship with Ian Brady. But there is one striking story which reveals how after each murder he liked to take a photograph of the victim's grave. It was Christmas 1960, and they were leaving St. James's Protestant Church in Gorton after midnight mass.
I retained a warm religious glow, and came out feeling warmed. Not so Ian, who took a long pull of whiskey and walked across the grass to the edge of a grave, where he casually urinated. I had no idea then that his graves would be marked by photographs and not headstones.
This is the first time Myra Hindley acknowledged that there was a system for marking graves. The way she characterises Brady as the mastermind behind the murders is continued in the 150,000 words she wrote to me years later. She claims he bullied her into abducting the children, and that she was never there when they died. But the pictures I have been given are frequently at odds with Myra Hindley's description of her relationship with Ian Brady. This unique visual record reveals the strength of the bond between them, and in doing so helps explain why the full significance of the photographs has remained hidden until now.
There's an element of play in that he's got his right hand almost round her neck, but she's not distressed, she's leaning towards him, and he's leaning back in order to look at her. So it's playful. Presumably, he got the camera to do that automatically.
Yes, self-timer looks like it's lying on the ground, doesn't it? Because the grass is focused in the foreground.
That's right.
The gun.
That looks almost military, doesn't it?
She joined a gun club.
Yes, that's right, to get the guns.
Domestic scene. She's very happy there, doesn't she?
Yeah, another relaxed scene, yes.
The Moors murderers met when Myra Hindley went for interview at a small chemical company called Millward's Merchandise. Ian Brady, who'd been brought up in Glasgow, was working there as a clerk.
Tommy, the boss, wanted to introduce me to his colleagues. He said, "This is Bert. You'll be taking quite a lot of work from him." Then turning to a tall man who was standing at the filing cabinet working, he said, "Myra, this is Ian. Ian, this is Myra."
Ian Brady had already served time in Borstal and prison for theft. He had also earned a reputation for being strange.
One of his nicknames was Lassie, indicating effeminateness. Certainly was bisexual in later life. His other nickname was Dracula, apparently, as a schoolboy. He was interested in pornography. He was cruel. He would torture kittens and see how long they took to die.
Ian Brady introduced Myra Hindley to the writings of the Marquis de Sade, which celebrate sexual sadism. He also played her recordings of Hitler's speeches. These photographs, among those given to me, were shot by Brady as he crouched in front of the television.
Es ist unser Wunsch und Wille, dass dieser Staat und dieses Reich bestehen sollen in den kommenden Jahrtausenden. Wir können glücklich sein zu wissen, dass diese Zukunft restlos uns gehört.
Myra Hindley and Ian Brady became almost inseparable. She called him Neddy, after a character in The Goons. He called her Hess, after Hitler's deputy. They felt their relationship set them apart from the rest of the world.
It was a very strange concatenation of circumstances, and the congruence was the sadistic cruelty. Where they were different was that she was socially very skilled, and he was quite withdrawn. So they're congruent in the middle, as it were, to do with their coolness and sadistic temperament, but complementary in terms of their social abilities.
In her letters, Myra Hindley says Ian Brady prepared her to be his accomplice over a period of 18 months. He first introduced her to the idea of killing with a book. It's divided into 2 sections, Crime of the Century and Trial of the Century. The victim is a child. It even has a character called Myra.
He had given me a book called Compulsion, which was the story of Leopold and Loeb. They decided to commit the perfect murder. They were studying the philosophy of Nietzsche and his theory of the superiority of the pure Aryan and the strong overcoming the weak. It was very much the Nazi philosophy. They kidnapped a 12-year-old boy for a ransom. They killed him, were caught, and sent to prison. I told him it was a very disturbing book, but why exactly had he wanted me to read it? He told me he wanted to do a perfect murder, and I was going to help him. That was why he needed me to pick someone up, because I was a woman, and a child would be more trusting of a woman. I burst into tears, and he slapped my head backwards and forward, and began strangling me. I managed to fight him off, and told him to stop it.
Her protestations are unconvincing in that context. People who are sadistic have masochistic elements to them. They've been brutalised in the past. And I accept there may be a balance here, but on balance the attraction of the relationship is more powerful than being abused. This relationship is very strong. She's happy with this.
I must be totally honest and say he wasn't always cruel and sadistic towards me. We had some pleasant, relaxing times in country places that he'd found in travels on his bike. We'd pack a picnic lunch, flasks of coffee and bottles of wine, and spend whole days in a peace and tranquillity that was such a contrast to the other side of him. These were moments I treasured and thought about when things were bad, trying to remember, telling myself that he couldn't help what he was, and maybe in time he would become accustomed to ordinary domesticity, and we could live a normal life.
But any possibility of a normal life disappeared on the 12th of July, 1963, when Myra Hindley picked up 16-year-old Pauline Reed in her van. She tricked her into going to Saddleworth Moor to look for a lost glove. Ian Brady followed on his motorbike. When they got there, he led Pauline onto the moor, raped her and cut her throat. Myra Hindley claimed she was not present during this or any of the other murders.
He led me to her body, which I tried not to look at. I didn't know at the time he was testing me, and that there was no need for me to be there. He told me to look at her. I'll never be able to forget what I saw. I stood and looked at the dark outline of the rocks, against the horizon of the dark sky, and 3 people died that night. Pauline, my soul, and God. No God would let what had happened happen.
Most people, most of the time, in most circumstances like that, would be terribly distressed by this and would suffer nightmares. They wouldn't be able to get it out of their head. They would probably get post-traumatic stress disorder, so-called, in which there's a reminiscence of the visual images you've seen. You can't get it out of your head. You can't control it. She may have had some of that, but it certainly didn't prevail at all.
Compliant in one murder, 4 months later, she helped in another. Like all the killings, it was meticulously planned, carried out, and recorded. 12-year-old John Kilbride was driven to Saddleworth Moor, where he too was raped and murdered. Several weeks later, they returned to his grave, and Ian Brady took a photograph.
He stopped me as I was walking and said to turn round, moved me about a bit, and told me to kneel down and look at Puppet, whose head was showing from where he was still wrapped inside my coat. I now know, and knew quite soon afterwards, that he'd photographed me virtually kneeling on John Kilbride's grave.
Do you believe that?
No, I don't. I think that she didn't know, because I think he rehearsed